The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of Bagram Airfield like a blade through silk. Major Kyra, Phantom, Voss sat in the briefing tent, nursing her third cup of coffee and watching condensation drip from the canvas walls. The message that would change everything came in fragments, broken by distance and desperation. Broken arrow, SEAL Team 6, coordinates follow, the transmission died. Then silence. The kind of silence that crawls under your skin and stays there. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reed burst through the tent flaps, his face pale in the fluorescent light. Behind him trailed a gaggle of pilots, all male, all younger, all convinced they knew better than the woman who'd been flying close air support missions since before they'd earned their wings. Reed's eyes swept the room and landed on Voss. She saw something there she'd never seen before: fear. "We've got a situation," Reed announced, his voice steady but tight. "SEAL Team 6 went dark 47 minutes ago. Last known position was Grid 41 RPQ 124756841, 30 clicks northeast of Fob Chapman. Intelligence suggests they walked into a battalion-sized Taliban force." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "The SEALs activated their emergency beacon 14 minutes ago. Standard extraction protocol puts their survival window at 90 minutes from beacon activation." Captain Derek Maverick Thompson, golden boy of the squadron, leaned forward. "Sir, that puts us at about 43 minutes remaining. Even with the PAVE Hawks, we're looking at a 30-minute flight time minimum." His Texas drawl carried the confidence of someone who'd never failed at anything important. "The weather's socked in," Reed continued. "Ceiling at 200 feet, visibility less than half a mile. The PAVE Hawks can't operate in these conditions." He turned to face the room. "We need close air support to prep the landing zone and provide cover for extraction. The weather window might open in 6 hours, but they'll be dead in 6 hours, Voss finished quietly. Reed nodded grimly. "The A-10s are our only option. They can operate in this weather, get under the ceiling, and provide the kind of firepower we need." Thompson stood up, chest puffed out like a peacock. "Sir, I volunteer to take lead on this mission. My weapons experience—" "Sit down, Thompson," Reed cut him off. His eyes were back on Voss. "Major, this is your show. You've got more combat hours in the Warthog than the rest of this squadron combined." Voss felt the familiar tingle in her fingertips, the one that always came before she strapped into her aircraft. But this time was different. This time, 12 men were counting on her to do something that everyone in the room thought was impossible. The mathematics of survival were working against them, but mathematics had never accounted for what a determined woman could accomplish when everything was on the line. Outside, thunder rolled across the Afghan mountains like the sound of distant war drums. The briefing room fell into the kind of silence that accompanies impossible missions. Voss studied the satellite imagery spread across the tactical display, her hazel eyes tracing terrain features that would either save 12 SEALs or become their graveyard. The target area sat in a bowl-shaped valley, surrounded by ridgelines that would funnel Taliban fighters like water through a drain. Worse, the weather system showed no signs of lifting. "Major," Reed continued, "the SEALs are pinned down in a compound here." He tapped the screen with a laser pointer, highlighting a cluster of mud brick buildings. "Intelligence indicates they're surrounded by at least 200 hostiles with mortars, RPGs, and heavy machine guns. The terrain makes helicopter insertion suicide." Thompson shifted in his chair, unable to contain himself. "Sir, with respect, this is exactly the kind of mission where my precision bombing experience would get everyone killed," Voss interrupted without looking up from the maps. "This isn't Iraq, Derek. This is close-quarters combat in a weather system that'll turn your precision bombing into friendly fire." She traced her finger along the valley walls. "These ridgelines create wind shear that'll throw off targeting systems. You need someone who can fly by instinct, not instruments." The room stirred with uncomfortable murmurs. Major Patricia Ice Kowalski, the squadron's only other female pilot, caught Voss's eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. She understood what the men couldn't see, that sometimes the best weapon systems operator was the one who'd learned to compensate for being underestimated. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the intelligence officer, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're looking at a combat radius of 450 miles in conditions where visibility is essentially zero. The Warthog's targeting pod will be useless, and GPS guidance is spotty due to atmospheric interference. You'll be flying visual contact only, at altitudes where small arms fire becomes a significant threat." Voss finally looked up from the maps. "Sergeant, I've been flying CAS missions in weather that would ground commercial airliners. The A-10 was designed for exactly this kind of fight." She stood, her 5'6" frame somehow commanding the attention of every person in the room. "The question isn't whether it can be done. The question is whether we're willing to let 12 Americans die because a mission looks impossible on paper." Reed checked his watch. "Major, you've got 38 minutes from beacon activation. Weather reconnaissance shows the ceiling dropping to 150 feet within the hour. After that, even the A-10 won't be able to operate safely." "Then I better get airborne," Voss replied, already heading for the door. Thompson called after her. "Voss, this is suicide. The Taliban know we're coming. They'll have every gun in that valley pointed skyward." She paused at the tent flap, her hand resting on the canvas. "Derek, you ever been shot down?" "No, ma'am." "I have, twice. Know what I learned?" She turned back to face him. "The moment you start believing your own limitations is the moment good people die." The desert wind caught the tent flap as she disappeared into the darkness. Rain drummed against the corrugated metal roof of the flight line shack as Voss pulled on her survival vest. The pre-flight ritual had become a meditation over 16 years of military service. Each buckle, each strap, each equipment check performed with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a life-or-death operation. Her crew chief, Technical Sergeant Maria Santos, worked in synchronized silence, both women understanding that words were inadequate for what lay ahead. "Ma'am," Santos said, her voice barely audible over the storm, "I've loaded you with a mixed payload. 6 Mark 82 500-pounders, 2 CBU-87 cluster munitions, and a full load of 30mm. The GAU-8 is singing like a church choir." She handed Voss her helmet. "I also took the liberty of installing the backup radio system. If primary comms go down, you'll still have contact with ground forces." Voss accepted the helmet, nodding the small American flag decal Santos had applied to the side. "You think 12 guys are worth risking a $20 million aircraft, Sergeant?" "Ma'am," Santos replied without hesitation, "I think 12 guys are worth risking everything." The walk to the aircraft felt longer than usual, each step through puddles and mud a reminder of how quickly conditions were deteriorating. Her A-10 Thunderbolt II sat on the tarmac like a mechanical vulture, its angular wings and twin engines designed for one purpose: delivering overwhelming firepower to ground targets. The aircraft bore the scars of previous missions, patch marks where shrapnel had been repaired, fresh paint over bullet holes, and the distinctive nose art that had earned her call sign: a translucent ghost carrying lightning bolts. "Tower, Phantom 1-1, requesting immediate departure, Priority Alpha," Voss radioed as she completed her pre-start checklist. "Phantom 1-1, Tower, winds gusting to 35 knots, visibility 1/4 mile, ceiling 150 feet. Recommend delay until conditions improve." "Tower, American lives are on the line. I'm departing with or without clearance." A pause, then, "Phantom 1-1 Tower, you're cleared for immediate departure. Godspeed." The twin General Electric TF-34 turbofan spooled up with a rising whine that cut through the storm noise. Voss felt the familiar vibration as 7 tons of titanium-armored aircraft strained against the brakes. The heads-up display showed weather data that would have grounded lesser pilots, but the A-10 had been designed to operate in conditions where other aircraft became lawn ornaments. She released the brakes and felt the Warthog surge forward, accelerating through sheets of rain that hammered the canopy like automatic weapons fire. At 80 knots, she pulled back on the stick, and the aircraft lifted into air so thick with moisture it seemed solid. Visibility dropped to zero within seconds of leaving the ground. Flying on instruments alone, Voss climbed through the weather, her mind automatically processing altitude, airspeed, and heading, while her hands made minute corrections to keep the aircraft stable. At 8,000 feet, she broke through the cloud deck into starlight so brilliant it seemed artificial after the storm below. The radio crackled. Any station, this is Chaos Actual. We are taking heavy fire. Request immediate close air support. Ammunition critical. Medical critical. Time is critical. 28 minutes remaining. The voice belonged to Command Master Chief Daniel Bear Morrison, a legend among Navy SEALs whose reputation for bringing his men home had become mythical. If Morrison was calling for help, the situation had moved beyond desperate into the realm of the impossible. Voss pushed the throttles forward, watching her airspeed climb toward the A-10's never-exceed velocity. Chaos Actual Phantom 11. I'm your close air support 30 miles out. Transmit your situation and coordinates. Phantom, Chaos Actual. We're pinned down in a compound. Grid 41 RPQ 124756841. Approximately 200 hostiles with heavy weapons have us surrounded. We've got 2 urgent surgical, 1 expectant. We're down to our last magazines. Voss checked her navigation display. 27 miles to target, descending through 6,000 feet. She began configuring the aircraft for combat, selecting weapons systems and reviewing target priorities. The cluster munitions would be effective against personnel in the open, but the 500-pound bombs would be necessary to destroy hardened positions. Chaos Actual Phantom 11. I'm going to need you to talk me onto target. Weather's 00 down there and I'll be flying visual only. Can you mark your position? Phantom, negative on marking devices. We used our last IR strobe 20 minutes ago. Voss felt her stomach tighten. Without visual reference points, she'd be dropping ordnance dangerously close to friendly forces using only voice directions and dead reckoning navigation. The margin for error was measured in meters, not miles. Roger, Chaos Actual. I'll make it work. Give me a detailed description of the compound and your exact position within it. Phantom, we're in the northeastern building, 2nd floor, east wall blown out. The main Taliban force is concentrated in buildings to our south and west. Heavy machine gun positions on the ridgeline to our north, mortars approximately 200 meters southwest of our position. Voss descended through 4,000 feet, watching the clouds swallow her aircraft like a gray mouth. The turbulence intensified as she entered the weather system, the A-10 bucking and shaking as competing air masses fought for dominance. At 2,000 feet, she caught her first glimpse of terrain, jagged mountain peaks emerging from the clouds like broken teeth. Chaos Actual Phantom 11. I'm entering the target area. Start talking to me. The radio exploded with the sound of automatic weapons fire and Morrison's voice shouting over the chaos. Phantom, we're taking fire from multiple directions. I can hear your engines. You're southwest of our position. Voss banked hard right, pulling the aircraft into a knife-edge turn that brought the compound into view through breaks in the clouds. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like deadly fireflies, concentrated around a cluster of buildings that sat in the valley floor like pieces on a chessboard. She could see the SEAL's position, the northeastern building with its missing wall, and the Taliban forces massed around it like predators circling wounded prey. 24 minutes remaining on the survival clock, and 12 men counting on her to rewrite the mathematics of war. The targeting picture became clear, as Voss completed her initial pass over the valley. Taliban fighters had established a classic envelopment, using the terrain to create interlocking fields of fire that turned the SEAL compound into a killing zone. Heavy machine gun positions on the northern ridgeline controlled the high ground, while mortar teams in the southwest provided indirect fire support. The main assault force occupied buildings and fighting positions that formed a semicircle around the pinned Americans. Chaos Actual Phantom 1-1. I've got eyes on your position. I'm going to start with the mortars, then work the ridgeline positions. Keep your heads down. Roger Phantom. We'll paint targets with our rifles when possible. Voss rolled the A-10 into a 45-degree dive, lining up her first attack run. The cluster munitions would be most effective against the mortar teams, personnel in the open who couldn't hide behind concrete and steel. She activated the weapons system, feeling the familiar vibration as the CBU-87 prepared for release. At 1,500 feet above ground level, she pickled the first cluster bomb and immediately pulled into a climbing left turn. The weapon detonated 2 seconds later, scattering 202 submunitions across the mortar position in a pattern designed to neutralize every living thing within a football field-sized area. Secondary explosions confirmed direct hits on ammunition stockpiles. Good hit, Phantom. Mortars are neutralized. But the victory came at a price. Taliban fighters throughout the valley now knew an A-10 was overhead, and every gun that could elevate began tracking her aircraft. Tracer rounds rose like deadly fireworks, creating a light show that was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The distinctive sound of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a 30mm rotary cannon that fired depleted uranium rounds at 3,900 rounds per minute, had earned the A-10 its nickname, the Warthog. But first, Voss had to survive long enough to use it. She rolled into her second attack run, targeting the heavy machine gun positions on the northern ridgeline. These were hardened positions, built into rocky outcroppings that provided natural protection. The 500-pound bombs would be necessary to destroy them, but accuracy was critical. Too far north and she'd waste ordnance on empty mountainside. Too far south and she'd kill the very men she'd come to save. Chaos Actual. I'm rolling in on the northern positions. Give me a distance check from your building to the ridgeline. Phantom, approximately 400 meters north of our position. We're marking our northeast corner with muzzle flashes, 3 quick bursts. Voss saw the signal, 3 brief flashes from the compound that provided the reference point she needed. She adjusted her attack angle, accounting for wind drift and the A-10's ballistic characteristics. At 1,200 feet, she released the first Mark 82, watching the weapon arc through the night air like a falling star. The explosion lit the valley like daylight, revealing details that had been hidden in darkness. Taliban fighters scrambling for cover, weapons positions carved into the mountainside, and the compound where 12 Americans fought for their lives. The machine gun position disappeared in a cloud of pulverized stone and metal. Direct hit, Phantom. Northern positions are down. But the celebration was premature. As the dust cleared, muzzle flashes resumed from secondary positions along the ridgeline. The Taliban had prepared defensive positions in depth, anticipating exactly this kind of air attack. 21 minutes remaining, and the enemy was adapting faster than the clock was counting down. The second machine gun nest opened fire just as Voss pulled out of her attack dive, green tracer rounds reaching toward her aircraft like deadly fingers. One round punched through the left wing, missing the fuel tank by 18 inches. Another sparked off the titanium bathtub that surrounded the cockpit, the A-10's signature armored protection system that had saved countless pilots from exactly this kind of ground fire. Taking hits, Voss reported calmly, checking her instruments for damage. Aircraft is still flyable, continuing the attack. The A-10 had been designed to absorb punishment that would destroy other aircraft. Redundant flight control systems, self-sealing fuel tanks, and armor plating in critical areas allowed it to continue fighting even after sustaining significant damage. But armor was only effective if you didn't push your luck too far. Voss banked hard left, using a ridgeline to mask her approach for the next attack run. The Taliban had concentrated their main assault force in buildings southwest of the SEAL compound, close enough to assault, but far enough away to avoid being caught in American defensive fire. These fighters represented the greatest threat. They were the ones who would eventually overrun the compound if not stopped. Chaos Actual, what's your ammunition status? Phantom, we're down to maybe 3 magazines per man. Johnson took a round through the chest. He's still in the fight but won't be for long. We need you to break up that main assault force before they rush us. Morrison's voice carried the controlled desperation of a professional soldier who understood exactly how thin the margin between life and death had become. Voss had heard that tone before, in the voices of soldiers who knew they were asking someone else to risk everything for them. She selected her third 500-pound bomb and rolled into another attack dive. This run would be the most dangerous yet. The Taliban fighters in the buildings could concentrate their fire, and she'd have to fly directly over their positions to achieve the attack angle necessary to avoid hitting the SEALs. At 1,000 feet above ground level, she could see individual fighters moving between buildings, their weapons trained skyward. The A-10's engines produced a distinctive sound, a deep, rumbling growl that announced its presence from miles away. There was no surprise attack possible, only the grim mathematics of mutual destruction. She released the bomb at 800 feet and immediately rolled into a hard right turn, pushing the aircraft's G-force limits to change her flight path before the concentrated ground fire could find its mark. The Mark 82 detonated directly between 2 buildings, the overpressure wave collapsing walls and silencing the weapons firing from within. Outstanding hit, Phantom. You got at least 30 of them. But 30 wasn't enough. Intelligence estimates put the Taliban force at over 200 fighters, and Voss was running low on the kind of precision weapons needed for danger-close missions. She had 3 bombs remaining, a cluster munition, and 1,150 rounds of 30mm ammunition. Against a force that size, in terrain that favored the defense, it might not be sufficient. 18 minutes remaining, and the mathematics were still working against them. The radio crackled with a new voice, younger, more strained than Morrison's professional calm. Phantom, this is Chaos 2-6. We've got movement in the eastern buildings. Looks like they're preparing for a final assault. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Tank Rodriguez had earned his call sign by absorbing punishment that would fell larger men, but even he couldn't hide the exhaustion in his voice. The SEALs had been fighting for over an hour, surrounded and outnumbered, burning through ammunition at an unsustainable rate. Voss climbed to 3,000 feet, using altitude to gain perspective on the tactical situation. The Taliban commander was smart. He was using the buildings for cover while massing forces for a coordinated assault on multiple axes. Once that attack began, the SEALs' defensive perimeter would collapse within minutes. Chaos Actual, I'm going to hit the eastern concentration with my last cluster bomb. After that, I'll have to rely on gun runs. Roger Phantom, be advised, we're hearing helicopter engines to the south. Might be enemy reinforcements. Voss checked her radar warning receiver. No threats displayed. But radar couldn't detect low-flying helicopters in mountainous terrain, especially in weather that interfered with electronic systems. If the Taliban had air mobility assets, the situation had just moved beyond desperate into the realm of the mathematically impossible. She rolled into her attack run on the eastern buildings, diving through layers of cloud that limited visibility to a few hundred meters. The cluster munition would be effective against personnel massed in the open areas between buildings, but she'd have to time the release perfectly to achieve maximum coverage without endangering the SEALs. At 1,200 feet, she pickled the CBU A-10 and pulled into a climbing turn. The weapon detonated in a chain of smaller explosions, each submunition designed to penetrate light armor and destroy personnel within a lethal radius of 15 meters. The Eastern Assault Force disappeared in a series of flashes that briefly illuminated the entire valley. Good effects, Phantom. Eastern Force is combat ineffective. But the celebration died as quickly as it began. The helicopter noise Rodriguez had reported was getting louder, and through breaks in the clouds, Voss caught sight of movement on the southern ridgeline. Taliban reinforcements were arriving exactly when the SEALs were least capable of dealing with them. Chaos Actual, how many helicopters do you count? Phantom looks like 2, possibly 3 birds. They're offloading troops on the southern ridge, approximately 800 meters from our position. Voss felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with impossible tactical problems. She had 3 500-pound bombs remaining, and enough 30mm ammunition for perhaps 2 sustained gun runs. Against a reinforced Taliban force with high ground and interior lines of communication, it wasn't enough firepower to guarantee success. But sometimes, the mathematics of war included variables that couldn't be calculated on paper. 16 minutes remaining, and Kyra, Phantom, Voss was about to discover what she was truly made of. The southern ridgeline erupted with muzzle flashes as Taliban reinforcements established new firing positions. From 800 meters away, their AK-47s and PKM machine guns couldn't achieve precision accuracy, but volume of fire had its own tactical value. Hundreds of rounds per minute rained down on the compound, forcing the SEALs to take cover and limiting their ability to return effective fire. Phantom, Chaos Actual, we're taking heavy fire from the south now. These guys are disciplined, they're using fire and maneuver tactics to close the range. Morrison's observation confirmed what Voss had already suspected. They weren't facing a typical Taliban force of farmers with rifles. This was a professional military unit, possibly foreign fighters with formal training. The kind of enemy that adapted to changing conditions and exploited tactical advantages with ruthless efficiency. She selected her 4th Mark 82 and began another attack run, this time targeting the helicopter landing zone. If she could destroy the aircraft on the ground, she'd prevent further reinforcement and potentially trap the newly arrived fighters without extraction options. The approach to the southern ridgeline required flying directly over the compound, exposing her aircraft to fire from 3 directions simultaneously. Taliban fighters in the remaining western buildings, the new positions on the southern ridge, and scattered survivors from her previous attacks all trained their weapons skyward as the distinctive sound of the A-10's engines announced her approach. At 1,500 feet, she could see the helicopters, 2 Soviet-era Mi-17s parked on a relatively flat area near the ridge crest. Troops were still disembarking from the second aircraft, moving with the professional efficiency of Special Operations Forces. These weren't local Taliban fighters. They were foreign military advisors, probably Pakistani ISI or Iranian Quds Force operatives. She released the bomb at 1,000 feet and immediately rolled into a hard left turn. The Mark 82 detonated between the 2 helicopters, the overpressure wave flipping both aircraft and creating a fireball visible through the clouds. Secondary explosions suggested the helicopters had been carrying additional ammunition or fuel. Excellent hit, Phantom. Both birds are down. But destroying the helicopters had cost her valuable ammunition, and the fighters they'd delivered were already establishing positions along the ridgeline. She had 2 bombs remaining and approximately 10 minutes of 30mm ammunition, enough firepower to influence the battle, but not enough to guarantee victory. The radio crackled with Rodriguez's voice. Phantom, Chaos 26, we've got wounded who need immediate medical attention. Johnson's losing a lot of blood and Morrison took shrapnel in the leg. The tactical situation was deteriorating faster than Voss could neutralize targets. Even if she managed to break up the current Taliban assault, the enemy could simply wait her out. The A-10's fuel state would eventually force her to return to base, leaving the SEALs defenseless against a force that still numbered in the hundreds. She climbed to 4,000 feet, using altitude to reassess the battlefield. The Taliban had adapted to her attacks by dispersing their forces and using covered positions, making her remaining bombs less effective. But they'd also created a new vulnerability. Their communications were stretched across a wider area, making coordination more difficult. Chaos Actual, Phantom 1-1. I'm going to try something different. I need you to coordinate with your team and give me precise target information for gun runs. Roger Phantom, what do you need? The 30mm has a much higher rate of fire than bombs, and I can make multiple passes. But I need exact locations for each target to avoid friendly fire incidents. Morrison's voice carried new hope. Phantom, we've got 4 guys with good observation positions. We can talk you onto individual targets. 13 minutes remaining, and the mathematics of war were about to change in favor of precision over power. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon was the reason the A-10 existed. Every other system on the aircraft, the engines, flight controls, landing gear, had been designed around the massive 30mm rotary cannon that occupied the aircraft's nose section. Fed by a drum containing 1,350 rounds of mixed ammunition, the weapon could fire armor-piercing depleted uranium rounds at 3,900 rounds per minute, creating a stream of destruction that could penetrate tank armor or reduce buildings to rubble. But using the gun effectively in danger-close situations required a level of precision that few pilots possessed. The difference between neutralizing enemy positions and killing friendly forces was measured in seconds of firing time and degrees of aircraft heading. Chaos 26 Phantom 1-1, I'm rolling in from the west. Give me a target. Phantom Chaos 26. Heavy machine gun position, 2-story building, 300 meters west-southwest of our position. Second floor, north-facing window. Voss rolled into a shallow dive, configuring the aircraft for a gun run. The A-10's targeting system displayed range, bearing, and ballistics information, but in the current weather conditions, she'd be firing based on visual reference points and experience rather than electronic precision. At 800 meters range, she could see the building Rodriguez had identified. Muzzle flashes from the second floor confirmed the target location. She lined up the aircraft's nose, accounting for wind drift and bullet drop, and squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 fired with a sound like canvas tearing at hypersonic speed. 50 rounds left the barrel in less than a second, each depleted uranium penetrator, capable of punching through 18 inches of steel armor. The second floor of the target building simply ceased to exist, reduced to pulverized concrete and twisted metal. Direct hit Phantom, target is destroyed. She pulled out of the dive and immediately began maneuvering for the next attack. The gun runs required her to fly low and straight, making the aircraft vulnerable to ground fire, but they also allowed her to engage multiple targets in rapid succession. Chaos 17, give me another target. Petty Officer Second Class David Ghost Williams responded immediately. Phantom, fighting position in the rocks, 400 meters northwest of our position. They've got an RPG team setting up for a shot at our building. The RPG team represented an immediate threat. A well-placed, rocket-propelled grenade could collapse the building where the SEALs had taken shelter, ending the fight regardless of how many Taliban fighters remained in the valley. Voss rolled into another gun run, this time approaching from the north to avoid overflying the compound. The rocky outcropping that sheltered the RPG team was barely visible against the mountainside, but she could see movement as the fighters maneuvered their weapon into firing position. She opened fire at 600 meters range, walking the 30-millimeter rounds across the target area. Rock and metal erupted in a line of destruction that obliterated the RPG position and sent debris cascading down the mountainside. Good kill, Phantom. RPG threat is neutralized. 11 minutes remaining, and the tide of battle was finally beginning to shift. The Taliban commander, watching his carefully planned assault dissolve under precision fire from an aircraft that seemed to anticipate his every move, made the decision that would determine the battle's outcome. Instead of continuing the methodical attack that had been bleeding his forces, he ordered a general assault on all axes simultaneously. If the SEALs could be overrun quickly, the A-10 would be forced to cease fire to avoid hitting American forces. Phantom, chaos actual. They're rushing us from all directions. I count at least 60 fighters moving toward our position. Voss could see the assault developing from her altitude, Taliban fighters emerging from covered positions throughout the valley, moving in small groups toward the compound. The coordinated attack would overwhelm the SEALs' defensive fire within minutes, but it also presented her with the kind of target engagement the A-10 had been designed for: massed personnel in the open. Chaos actual. Get everyone into the basement or most protected area of your building. I'm going to hose down everything around your position. Roger, Phantom. We're moving to the ground floor northeast corner. The building has thick walls. We should be protected from overpressure. Morrison's calm professionalism under extreme stress had kept his team alive this long, and Voss knew she could trust his judgment about structural protection. But what she was planning had never been attempted in combat conditions. A sustained gun run in a 360-degree pattern around a building containing friendly forces, with margins of error measured in meters rather than kilometers. She rolled into a wide left turn, setting up for a racetrack pattern that would bring the GAU-8 to bear on targets approaching from all directions. The key was maintaining consistent altitude and airspeed while adjusting her aim point to follow the moving targets below. The first firing pass targeted the western approach, where a group of approximately 20 fighters was advancing through the buildings Voss had previously bombed. She opened fire at 800 meters, walking the 30-millimeter rounds across their position in a pattern designed to catch fighters moving between covered positions. The effect was immediate and devastating. The depleted uranium rounds punched through walls, vehicles, and human targets with equal efficiency, creating a zone of destruction that stopped the Western assault in its tracks. Good effects, Phantom. Western approaches stopped. But the other assault groups were still moving, and Voss had perhaps 600 rounds of ammunition remaining. She pulled into a climbing right turn, positioning for another gun run on the southern approach, where Taliban reinforcements from the helicopter landing zone were advancing up the valley floor. This group was larger, at least 30 fighters spread across a frontage of 200 meters. They were using fire and movement tactics, with one element providing covering fire while another advanced. Professional soldiers who understood how to minimize casualties from air attack. Voss opened fire at maximum effective range, using short bursts to conserve ammunition while maintaining accuracy. The 30-millimeter rounds created a wall of destruction across the advancing forces' path, forcing them to take cover and disrupting their coordinated movement. Southern force is taking cover, Phantom. They've stopped their advance. 9 minutes remaining, and approximately 400 rounds of ammunition left in the drum. The northern approach presented the greatest challenge. Taliban fighters on the ridgeline had superior fields of observation and were directing the assault from positions that were difficult to engage with the aircraft's gun. Voss would have to fly directly toward the ridge, exposing her aircraft to concentrated fire from elevated positions. Chaos 2-6, how many fighters do you count from the north? Phantom, maybe 15 to 20 coming down from the rocks. They're using the terrain to stay in cover until the last 100 meters. Voss rolled into her most dangerous gun run yet, diving toward the ridgeline at an angle that would bring her within small arms range of every Taliban position on the mountain. The A-10's armor could stop most rifle rounds, but concentrated fire from multiple directions could still find vulnerable areas like engines, flight controls, or the pilot. At 400 meters range, she opened fire on the descending fighters. The 30-millimeter rounds ricocheted off rocks and exploded against stone, creating a cascade of metal fragments and pulverized granite that swept the mountainside clear of human targets. Tracer rounds reached toward her aircraft from positions she hadn't detected, green streaks that passed close enough to her canopy to cast shadows on the instrument panel. One round sparked off her right engine intake, another punched through the vertical stabilizer. "Taking more hits," she reported. "Aircraft is still flyable, northern approach is neutralized." But the respite was temporary. Taliban fighters who had taken cover during her gun runs were already beginning to move again, and she had perhaps 200 rounds of ammunition remaining, not enough for another complete circuit of the compound. "Chaos Actual, what's your status?" Morrison's voice carried exhaustion and pain. "Phantom, we've got 3 men down, 2 critical. Johnson's unconscious from blood loss. We're down to maybe 1 magazine per man." 7 minutes remaining on the survival clock, and both sides were running out of resources to continue the fight. The decision that would determine the battle's outcome came from an unexpected source. Technical Sergeant Santos, monitoring the radio traffic from Bagram Airfield, broke into the tactical frequency with information that changed everything. "Phantom 1-1, Overlord Base. Be advised, we have a Predator drone orbiting your position at 20,000 feet. The bird is armed with 2 Hellfire missiles and has been tracking the engagement for the past 15 minutes. Voss felt a surge of hope. Hellfire missiles were precision weapons with minimal collateral damage, exactly what she needed to eliminate the remaining Taliban leadership without endangering the SEALs. "Overlord, Phantom 1-1. Can the Predator engage targets danger close to friendly positions?" "Phantom, affirmative.